All right, Mike, I think it's already 6:01, so let's start.
Okay.
All right. A very good evening to all of you. Good evening, Mike, and thank you so much for taking some of your valuable time to share some information about TEFL today. All right. So
You're very welcome.
let me just give a very brief introduction of Mike to each and everyone out there. Mike graduated with his Cambridge University Delta, was graduated in corporate communications and is currently finishing his MA in education TESOL. He has trained thousands of teachers for governments, universities, and education institutes throughout Asia, Europe, and the Americas. As well as training teachers, Mike has 25 years experience teaching adults and young. He has also published teaching books, presented at numerous conferences, and sat on TESOL boards of directors. Thank you.
Oh my, Sushmita, you make me sound old.
Yes?
I said you make me sound old because I have all this experience.
Yes, that's true. All right, Mike,
Okay,
I think you can proceed ahead now, Mike. Are you ready with your presentation and everything?
Yeah, I just want to put up a board so I can write some things that everybody can see.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, where is that board? Let me see. Here we go. Okay, hello everybody, and welcome. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Sushmita.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, I'm just give me a minute here to put this up. Okay, can everybody see the board?
Just a minute, let me see. I think it is, I can open it, and I think others cannot view only. Others will not be able to see it. I think so.
Oh.
Right.
You can't see it? Let me try.
Yeah, there is a link, Mike. I think it's, if you can open the link, you can share the whiteboard. Is there something with you for presentation?
Yeah, there's a link. It says anyone with the link can share it. I'm going to write on it. Tell me if you can see it.
Just a minute. Let me check. If I can do so, let me share it. Is it fine? I have shared the whiteboard, the link that you have shared with me.
Okay, so everybody can see the whiteboard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can see.
Okay,
I can see.
great.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mike. You can proceed.
Yes, yep.
Everyone can see the whiteboard.
Okay. And I'm just going to write on the whiteboard. Can everyone see that? I drew an L. Okay. Hang on a second. You can draw on this whiteboard, but you can't type on it. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the history of language teaching methodology.
I think there will be a problem in writing anything in the board. I think, Mike, it's better if you can just explain us regarding the methodologies of TEFL.
Yeah, well, I want to show some examples of the traditional methodologies.
Yeah, I think if you have some presentation for that, you can share it with us. Asifa, please mute yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Asif, I request you to mute yourself.
What's that? Hang on, we're gonna try something else here.
Yes, Mike, I want to say that I think it's not properly working. The whiteboard is not properly working. So if you want to share any presentation, that will be easier, I think. Do you have any presentation?
Well, it's an example of a methodology. So I want to give an example by teaching it for a couple minutes on the board to show everybody this methodology.
Okay.
So usually I just write it on the board and then teach it from there, but I can't.
So now it's a problem? You're facing any problem to write in the board?
Yeah, I can't type on the board. I can only draw pictures. So I'm trying to draw it.
Yeah, that's what I can find it out. You are having some problem in writing out there.
Yeah, can you see what I'm writing on the board though?
We can see what you're writing, but it's totally unreadable. We can't find out what you're writing.
It's unreadable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be easier if I could just find a way to type it. Hang on a second. Okay, maybe I found it here. Yeah. Sorry, everybody. I'm kind of not new, but I'm an old teacher, so technology is a little bit iffy for me. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit today about TESOL methodologies and how people have learned languages. Now, everybody here can speak another language or has learned another language? Are there any examples of anybody that has learned another language?
Yes, I hope many have done that so.
Oh,
apart from the native language, we all know some language, one or two language.
Oh, well, let's use you. You speak another language, right, Susmita?
Yes, my mother tongue is Bengali, and I speak English, I speak Hindi, I speak Assamese, I speak Nepali.
Oh, tell me, how did you learn English?
I learned English from school. I communicated with my friends, and we need to speak English in schools. That made my English much more fluent. Instead of just coming out from the grammatical part, we need to talk in English.
So how did they teach you? What method?
Pardon, I can get you?
What method did you use to learn English?
At that time, though, it was a traditional method, but now we have learned communicative method is the best method to learn any language.
Tell us about that method that you learned. What did you do? What did the teachers have you do?
Nothing as such. We just read books. We had grammar books, text, exercises. That's all.
Okay, because very good.
At the time we studied, that was all traditional method. Now it's progressive, so communicative method gained much more popularity.
Yes, we're not talking about communicative method. We're talking about traditional methods. So, yes, that's great. How you learned English traditionally, that's what we want to know. Did a lot of you learn English the same way as Susmita?
Yes, almost the same way.
Yes, sir.
Everybody did. Okay. Well, that is the very first method that was created to teach languages. Does anybody know what that method is called?
It's a direct method of teaching.
Direct method. Yeah, there's another name. Has anyone heard of the grammar translation method?
Yeah,
yes.
Grammar translation method.
Okay, well, let's talk about that for a minute, because a lot of you said that you learned English that way. And let me tell you a little bit about how language teaching began. Throughout history, people have learned other languages as they traveled or did business. But throughout history, we never had one method that we could use to teach. What happened was that, like with English teaching, the traditional method came from translating Latin to English, because in the 17th, 18th, and even 19th century, people translated the Bible from Latin in Western countries to English. And they translated like Greek plays, Greek philosophy, Greek literature, Greek science, all into English through this method. So up until about like 1886 or something like that, I think it was, this is the only way we knew how to teach a language to somebody, was through the grammar translation method. Now, let me give you a little example of it so I can show you how this method works. Just be a couple minutes here. Does anybody speak Spanish? No? Nobody speaks Spanish? Okay.
No.
Well, it's your lucky day. I'm going to teach you some Spanish. Okay, can you see the board? This says, "Ha comprado un coche." I have bought a car. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm still with you. Okay, so this is how we make the present perfect in Spanish. Now, how you make the present perfect in Spanish is you take the verb, like here we have the verb comprar, which is buy, to buy, and you just to the end of the verb. And that makes the present, the past participle. Okay? And ha is I. Okay. So, have you got a pen and paper?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Well, can means you. And coche is a car, but an apple is Manzanilla, I think. I think that's what it is. Okay. Why don't you see if you can write, I have bought an apple, or sorry, you have bought an apple. Can you write that? What's the answer? To say you have bought an apple in Spanish, what do you say?
Han mandenal.
Good. You're almost.
Yeah.
But with bought. So you
An
have
Mandela.
bought.
An.
You have bought an apple is what?
Han comprado.
Here we go. Yep, keep going.
Han comprado manzanilla.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right. Almost done. Hang on. Okay, good. I made a mistake. Han is actually they. Okay, has is he or she. And a video game is a juego video. So how would you say in Spanish, she has bought a video game?
Has comprado and you do the video.
Wow, your Spanish is excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, has comprado un juego de video. Okay, very good. All right, so what we're doing here is the grammar translation method. Now, the grammar translation method, as you can see, the same way you maybe learned English, is the teacher explains everything in your own language. And they put the grammar on the board, they teach you the grammar, and then they get you to do exercises like I'm doing now. I'm telling you what to say in English, and you're telling me in Spanish. And that's an example of the grammar translation method. Now, have many of you used that method before?
Yeah, we have used it, sir.
Yeah, use it sometime.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
what?
you have used a lot.
What do you think? Did you like it?
Yeah, it's easy, I think, to learn.
Really? Okay, okay. That is one of the positive points of the method, is that it can be easy, especially
very
for
easy.
somebody.
Mm.
Yeah, especially for somebody that's very analytical, that likes to do logical kind of thing. But as you can see, that method is not very good. As Sashmita said earlier, is now we're doing communicative teaching. So this was the very first method of teaching English that was ever created. It was created in 1886 by the IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet. Hang on, let me put this up here for us. And here we go. Okay. Just 1 minute. Hang on a second here. Okay, so this method, as I said, was created in 1886, the grammar translation method with IPA. Some of you know that from the phonetic chart. They created the International Phonetic Chart, and then the International Phonetic Association. Now, the problems with this method is it's very strict syllabus. And it's very teacher-centered, right? One of the big criticisms with this method, although it's, as you said, it's easy because you can kind of look at how the language works, the structure, and teach it, but it's all the teacher doing all the work, the teacher doing all the thinking, the teacher putting on there, and the students just kind of writing what the teacher says. We call this deductive teaching. And deductive teaching is when the teacher is doing the work and the students are kind of passive learners. Okay, so as you can see, what we know now from language teaching is that language is a skill that that you acquire by doing it. But back then in 1886, when we had this first method, we thought that, well, the teacher just has to explain everything. The students just have to do translation. We give them textbooks and they can do grammar exercises. And that's the way language was taught for almost 100 years. It was known as the empty vessel paradigm because it was seen as the student is like an empty glass and the teacher is a pitcher full of knowledge. And the teacher just has to turn the student on their head and pour the language into their ear. So that's how we did teaching of English or of languages for the first 100 years until about 1980s. Okay, that was the main method. Now, a lot of you said you used it in India or other places. the same thing, it's still used now in a lot of countries in Asia. Like when I work in China or Korea or Japan, they still use this method. And the students can pass the test, but they can't speak English. Like when I go to Korea, they can all pass their tests because they study, they go to private schools until, 6 days a week. It's amazing. But you meet any Koreans, in a restaurant or whatever, and they used to say to me, I cannot speak English. I said, but you studied English more than anybody else. Yeah, but we never spoke it. We just studied it. So we realized this method was not very helpful. It's not a very good method. And it's still used, especially to help with tests. But most good language teachers know that this if you can see, ha for the verb have, you can see a pattern, and that helps you to learn. But if we did this for hours, you'd get tired and you wouldn't be able to speak English. So this went on until about the 1920s. Okay? And in the 1920s, there was a psychologist named B.F. Skinner. Has anyone heard of him?
Yes.
Yes, okay, yeah, probably right. Okay. Skinner, he wasn't a language expert, but he was a psychologist, and he created something called behaviorism. And he said with behaviorism that children are conditioned. We learn things through conditioning. You probably know the old story of Pavlov's dog. You give the dog, you ring a bell and you give the dog food, and the dog starts to salivate. And then, because the dog has learned that behavior, okay? So this behaviorism was created in the 1920s, and it was a big thing back in that time. Behaviorism. And people thought, well, we can learn languages that way. And actually, in the 1920s, then Skinner argued and all that. He said, listen, we change things by copying things. Now, what happened was the U.S. Army, when the war was on, they wanted their American soldiers to learn Japanese in case they got captured by Japanese soldiers or they needed to translate or something. They wanted them to learn Japanese and German very quickly. So they thought this was a way to teach languages very quickly. So they created what was called the Army method in like the 1940s. And it was very successful with the soldiers. So when the World War II ended, then psychologists, professors of universities and stuff said, hey, this is how we can teach languages. And the Army method became what was known as the, anybody know the name? ALM? The audio-linguistic method. Anyone heard of that? No? Okay, the audio-linguistic method was very big during the 1940s, the 1950s, and stuff like that. And it was actually the opposite of the grammar translation method. With the grammar translation method, you study the grammar, and you do grammar exercises. With the audio-linguistic method, you did no studying of grammar at all. Okay? What you did is the teacher would say something and you would repeat. Okay? And you do this again and again. Let's try, okay? Let's try. Everybody say cock, cock. I can't hear you. Cock.
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 Good. Breathe.
Breathe.
Again, breathe.
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 Cock, breathe.
Cock, breathe.
Again, everybody, cock, breathe.
Cock. Breathe.
Cock, breathe.
Dash.
Bash.
Bash.
Dash.
Bash.
Cock, dash, brat.
Cock. Brush.
Cock, dash, den?
Cock,
Cock,
rat.
bash, den.
Den, right, very good. Okay, so now you can speak Russian. You just said in Russian, how are you, how is your brother, and how is your day? Now, you were using the audio-linguistic method here because I didn't ask you to write anything. I didn't ask you to translate. I just asked you to repeat after me, and that's all you did. So with this method, we have a lot of repetition. And I don't know if you know the term drilling. Do you know drilling? Drilling is the word we say in TESOL when you make your students repeat after you. Okay, so drilling is actually an Army word, right? When you make soldiers drill, you make soldiers repeat in unison. So this method was the same way, and they said, okay, well, drilling is when you make your students repeat, the same as the Army. So that word came right out of the Army and right into teaching literature because that's where the method came from originally. Okay, I'm just trying to find some more. Okay, now the audio-linguistic method, as I said, is drilling. There's no rule explaining. There's no focus on language. It's just repeating after the teacher. Now, have any of you used that method before?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
Okay,
we did.
all right. Okay. There are some big schools in the world that use it, like Berlitz. I don't know if you know the company Berlitz. I worked for them for years. You go into class with a book and you show a picture and you make the students repeat. Okay? Some students really like that, and I found in my experience it's very good for somebody to learn a little bit of language very quickly, but then they usually forget it. I just, a couple weeks ago, I took a Honda executive through his MBA test, and he wanted to use this method. So I was just making him repeat all the time. But again, it's very teacher-centered because the teacher is doing the work, not the student at all. Okay? The student is just repeating after. So again, it's very deductive teaching and not all that popular now. But back in the 40s and the 50s, it was a very big, important thing. So those are the two main traditional methods. Was you had kind of like grammar translation throughout history up until 1886. And then 1886 to the 1940s, you had this audio-linguistic method that was very popular. Okay. So what happened after that? Well, let me just erase the board, okay, so I can get some more room here. If I can do that. Sure thing. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what happened was another guy came along in the 1960s. And his name was Chomsky, Noam Chomsky. How many of you have heard of him?
Yeah.
Anyone?
Yes.
Yeah. If you study like a master's degree, you study a lot about him. So Noam Chomsky came along in the 1950s, the 1960s, and he argued with Skinner. He said, no. People don't learn by copy, especially languages. He said, I saw a child today, and the child heard their mother say, yesterday Mama walked to the store, she shopped at the store, and she talked to her friend. And then the child said, oh, yesterday I goed to school. Now, the child has never heard Mama say goed, but the child has said, oh, when Mama talks about the past, she puts ed on the end. I need to do the same. So the child thinks about that and says, okay, I'll put ed on the end of goed and gets goed. So Chomsky argued there was many actually newspaper arguments between Chomsky and Skinner in the U.S. newspapers for years, arguing about this point. Skinner saying, no, we learn by copying. And Chomsky saying, no, there is some sort of cognitive, some sort of thinking involved in language learning. So what Chomsky did was he created what was called cognitivism. which was basically thinking about the language. Okay, he said, as I said, he said that children will overgeneralize. Okay, now Chomsky did not create Chomsky's argument that, oh, wait, we can't get a language just by copying somebody else. We also have to think about it. Okay, and this changed language teaching because in the 1970s, late 1960s, 1970s. Hang on a second, I'll put that up. 1960s, 1960s. You had what's called the 4 humanistic methods. Okay, so what happened was after people accepted cognitivism, that language is not just about studying grammar, it's not just about repeating after somebody, but there has to be some sort of thinking involved. There were four humanistic methods that were created in the 1960s and 70s that became popular. Now, does anybody know any of those 4? No? Nobody's heard of any of them? Okay, let me quickly tell you then what they are. So one of them was called, I think the first one was called TPR. Have you heard of TPR?
Yes, we do.
Yes, it's very popular. It's still one of the most popular methods in the world for teaching children. And TPR involves physical. It came from a guy named James Asher. And James Asher, at the time, in the late 60s, he was living in Germany. And he was a professor, and he was trying to learn German. And so he was using the grammar translation method. He was studying his books all the time. And his little children, his American children, they'd go outside and play with the German children. They'd come in for dinner, and they could speak better German than him. And he said, what's going on? They're playing, and they can speak better German than me. So he went outside, and he watched them. And he throw the ball. Let's eat a hot dog today. Where's your hat? So he thought, okay, well, a great way to learn language is by putting physical to it. And that's what TPR is. You get the children to do things. You get, you say stand up and you stand up. You say sit down and you sit down. They watch you do this as you say the words, and then you get them to do it with you. And then after, you can just say the words and they can do it. They learn the command with the action. And that's basically what TPR was. It was very, very popular. I still use it often with children. And a lot of schools, like there are schools all over China called TPR schools, where they just use this method to teach children. Now, my experience, it's very good for low-level ones, put it in, put it under and stuff. It's good for adjectives. Give me the red pen, give me the blue pen, give me the big book, the small book, and so on. So this is language that children needs. And because they have physical, children, if you teach children, they have a lot of energy. In fact, I always tell teachers, children aren't really naughty. They just have energy and they don't know what to do with it. So if you're a good teacher of children, you have to use that energy. Otherwise, they use that energy to be naughty in your class. Now, TPR allows you to do this. It allows you to use their energy. So it was very popular in the late 60s, and it's still popular in some places. Now, another method that came out during that time was called the silent way. Anyone heard of that one? No? The silent way was created by a Spanish math professor named Caleb Gategano. And his thinking was, if we don't speak English in the class, then the students are forced to speak English, which I found to be true, right? People are afraid of silence. If there's too much silence, people speak. So if the teacher doesn't speak, then the children the students get nervous and they speak. So it's very successful. I learned actually Czech through this method, and it was very good. The teacher didn't talk. You had to speak in the language. It was seen as very successful as well. Don't think I spelled that right, the silent way. And it was very, very popular in the 60s and the late 70s. It's still used in some places, but not as popular as other things. Okay. Okay. And I want to, when I finish at the end here, I'm going to tell you why these methods were very important to language training. Now, a method is called Suggestopedia. Anyone heard of that method? Okay, Suggestopedia is a very, you've heard of it? Yes? Okay. Have you used it before?
No.
No, okay, okay. It's quite interesting. With Suggestopedia, what you do is you put the students in a quiet area, you put on some background music, like some quiet classical music, and the teacher just reads in another language. And maybe a little bit of translation too, so the students understand, but the students are just kind of soaking it in. And the soft music and the comfortable chairs, sometimes they're lying down, almost asleep, kind of like, you know, hypnotism almost. It was a very popular method, humanistic method in the early 70s and even in the 80s. Like I remember in Canada, there were all these marketing gimmicks, you know, learn French while you drive, learn English while you sleep. And those all came from Suggestopedia. They were created by a guy named George Lazanov, which he was a Bulgarian man actually, and it came up from there. But his idea was that, you know what, when we're learning something, we have what's called an affective filter. Like if we're nervous and we're worried, then we block everything out, right? If I walk on the street and there's a car coming that's going to hit me, I'm not thinking about anything except the car and moving. So Lazanov's idea was we need to lower the affective filter. We have to make them completely comfortable, relaxed, confident with the lighting, with the seating, with the music, and they will pick it up on their own. And that's basically what the silent way was. Again, or Suggestopedia was. Again, very popular in the late 70s and even in the early 80s. Now, the last humanistic method that was created was called community language learning. And this is an interesting method. I love teaching with this method. And this was created by a guy named Charles Curran from Loyola University in Chicago. And his idea was that, okay, there are 5 stages of development that a child goes through. The child, you know, as a baby is very dependent on the adults. Then they become like 2, 3 years old, and they have this self-assertive stage where they say, no, 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 no. Then they get older, and it's a resentful stage where they want to do things on their own. Then they become teenagers. They start to learn to become tolerant of other people. And finally, as adults, they become independent adults or people. So Curran's idea was language develops the same way. The beginner student is dependent on the teacher for translation help. Then they get the pre-intermediate stage. They become very self-assertive. At the intermediate stage, they become resentful. That's usually the plateau stage, we call it. A lot of people stop learning English at that stage because they can communicate a little bit. Once they get into the upper intermediate stage, they become more tolerant, being able to start and do conversations. And finally, at the advanced level, they become independent, fluent learners. So his idea was to take language learners through these same 5 stages. And what he would do is he'd put people of different levels in a small group, and they could talk about anything they wanted. So he would record it as well. So they'd have like 5 people in a group, a beginner, pre-intermediate, maybe advanced, and they would talk about whatever they wanted, and he would record it. After 15 minutes, he would play it back, and he would write the errors on the board. So that the beginner was learning from the intermediate student. The intermediate was learning from the advanced student, and it was all very kind of communicative, and was building kind of very communicative, talking about what you want kind of class. And that's what CLL, or community language learning, is all about. I used it in the Czech Republic with a group of air traffic controllers. They loved it. They came to class, they could talk about planes, hockey, drinking beer. I just recorded them, and I wrote the corrections for English on the board, and they learned from that. And then the next day, they used what they learned. So their language really improved quite quickly. And that's the community language learning. Again, if I had time, I would show you some examples of all these methods so you can see. Okay, so what happened here with the language learning? As I said, there were some other small methods, like somebody mentioned the direct method, very similar to the audio-linguistic method, and goes way back. But the main, if you look at the main paths of traditional methodology in language learning, you'll see that most of it carried around the grammar translation method, and then the audio-linguistic method, and then after Chomsky, into these 4 humanistic methods. And that brought us right up to the 1980s. And in the 1980s, we had what I call our third revolution in language teaching. The first one, of course, was going from grammar translation to speaking. The second one going from speaking to the humanistic methods, which involved more of the student learning, right? The Suggestopedia, they taking in what they want, total physical response, them interacting physically, and so on. So these 4 humanistic methods taught us that the student is very important participating in the language method. Okay, and that's basically what the traditional methodologies was for language learning and language teaching over the years. Okay, hang on a second. So, how did this affect us? I'm going to erase the board here and I'll show you, okay? If I can figure out where did the board clearing go. There we go. I'm trying to post this up. 1 minute. Copy. Okay, I just wanted to put on the board how these traditional methods affected language learning. So I'll just tell you. So with the grammar translation, we realize you cannot learn English or another language through that method. But we did learn that it's helpful if our students use their first language to help to see the patterns learning the second language. So you might have found that little Spanish demonstration I did with you easy because you could see, okay, this is how I make the past participle. This is how I make the verb have. And these are how I change the nouns, video game, car, apple, to make the sentence. Okay, so the grammar translation was easier for you because you could think in English while you were learning the Spanish. Now, the audio-linguistic method, we realized that by drilling, making students repeat things, this helps us retain the language. So audio-linguistic method is not used very much now. Communicative teaching and comprehensive teaching is more important, but we do still do a lot of drilling and repetition because it does help to kind of make the language firm in the student's mind. So it's often used. I'm sure a lot of you probably make your students repeat things still. I certainly do if I'm doing pronunciation, teaching new words, and so on. Now, with total physical response, we realize that the language becomes more memorable if we use physical and visual cues. And that's why a lot of English teachers now use pictures in class or videos or do physical things with the students because that helps retain the language. With the silent way, we realized, hey, it's true, the less the teacher talks, the more the students will. And that's why, as you know, with communicative teaching, as a teacher, you're more like a coach, right? You're trying to get the students to talk as much as possible. And we always say that, you know, every time the teacher speaks, you are stealing the speaking time from the students. So the less you speak in class, the more your students will speak and better for them. So we realized that was important when we saw the silent way. With Suggestopedia, we saw that the learning atmosphere needs to be relaxed. The student needs to feel confident in order to take risks with the language. And that's what CLL taught us, or sorry, what Suggestopedia taught us, to relax. And so in a lot of communicative classes, As you can see, we try and make it comfortable for the students. We try and play games, things like that. We want them to relax so they feel confident and comfortable using the language and taking risks. A good language user always takes risks and doesn't worry about errors, but is not afraid to use the language. Finally, with community language learning, we realize that students need a language that's purposeful to them. It should be personal, it should be interesting, and should involve others. And that's what we gathered from the community language learning method. So from all of these 6 traditional methods, you can kind of see how this led to communicative teaching, right? Okay, we got to get the students speaking. We got to relax them. We got to talk about things interesting to them. We got to use visuals. We got to get them to repeat. We got to show them some of the grammar. All these things came from those methods, and that led us to the 1980s with communicative language teaching. What happened in the 1980s was we had another expert that came along, and his name was, anyone guess? Nobody knows? Who came along in the 80s? And what's that?
Stephen Krashen, I think.
That's right. Very good. You've studied your methodology, haven't you?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So you have to study a lot of Stephen Krashen. So Stephen Krashen, interesting, an American, he's still alive today. And he came along and he said, you know what? He said something very important. He said, you cannot learn a language. You can acquire a language. Now, why is that important? Because before the 1980s, we saw language teaching the same as teaching science or teaching maybe biology or other same as other things in school. That we just have to tell the students, they write it in the book, they study it at home, and then they can have it. But that's not true. Language learning is a skill, and it's just like dancing or cooking or driving. Now, when you learn to drive, it's not, you didn't study a book, write a test, say, hey, I can drive. You learn to drive by doing it. And the more you did it, the more familiar you came to it. So that when you drive now, you get in the car, you do it automatically with your body. You don't think about it. And the same with language. Okay? It's a skill. So Krashen proved that you can't get it by studying it like other other sectors. You can only get it by doing it, by practicing it. And so we know now that language is a skill that's acquired. And good communicative teachers know you cannot stand up and just tell your students, this is English, go and study it. No, you can only get your students to acquire it by using it again and again in class. Okay? It's something that's interesting for them, so you keep them focused and they're doing it again and again. And that creative communicative teaching. Actually, Krashen created more of a comprehensive training, kind of like TPR, where the students are focused more on input, on listening and feeling comfortable. Communicative teaching is more using the language and not feeling comfortable, but feeling able to take risks with the language. So in the 1980s, we had comprehensive training, we had communicative teaching, and those are the big methodologies now. And I'm sure on your TESOL course, you're being taught communicative teaching because that's what works really, really well in the world. It's been used in, say, European countries for the last 25 years, and in Europe, they speak English very well. So in a lot of Asian countries, they're trying to do communicative teaching. And that's where we are today. That's where we are with communicative teaching. And that's pretty much all I have to say about traditional methodology, unless there's some questions.
Yes, everyone, if you have any few questions, you can put across to Mike.
Please.
We will take few questions from you on. No questions, it seems, Mike. Everyone is very clear.
No questions about methods you've used or methods you want to use, maybe?
Don't have any questions or any queries?
It was very clear in my presentation, wasn't it?
Yes, it seems to be. You are very clear to everyone. Yeah, and many of them will be...
Very nice. Yes, it's very clear actually.
Okay. And I'm sure with APTTI, you're learning communicative teaching, right? Because the focus of a lot of TESOL courses is trying to get teachers to stop thinking about teaching language traditionally with grammar translation methods and audio linguistic methods and so on, is trying to get modern language teachers to do communicative teaching because that's what works. And so if you take anything away from this webinar, I hope you take away the idea that, hey, when I teach, I'm not going to make my students just study grammar. I'm going to make them use the language, because that's where traditional methods have brought us to today, to modern teaching. Okay, I don't really have anything else to say, Sushmita, because I thought there was some questions, and I was going to do some demonstrations of the methods for people, but we won't do that.
Yeah, so Vipula, do you have something to say, or shall we wind up?
Not.
Everything was clear, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine. Thank you
His
so much.
main way, it wasn't the phonics.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
And I don't know if you were at the last webinar, but I said when you're teaching pronunciation to your students, you're not actually teachers, you're doctors. You're doing physical therapy. You're trying to change the muscles in their mouth. Okay? The same with when you're doing the rest of English or language teaching, you're working as coaches. Like you're coaching a football team. You're trying to get them to use the ball and to play the game. Okay? Not to study. So you're no more like a science teacher. You're now like the gym teacher at your school. The same.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So take
All
your
right
students.
then, Mike. I think we can wind up now. Thank you
Sure
so
can,
much.
okay? Take your students through a very good workout next time, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Mike. It was
Looking
wonderful.
forward. Take care. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good day tomorrow.
Thank you. Good night, Mike. Good night, everyone.
Good night, ma'am. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night, ma'am. Good night, sir.
Yeah, good night.
Good
Bye,
night.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Most welcome.